Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be covering the best decks that you can play on MTG Arena in the standard best of one format. So these are going to be looking at the weekly trends in our metagame breakdown, kind of looking at what's happening week over week in terms of the highest win rate decks. Today we're going to be focusing on Mythic Rank since it's the end of the month. So these are the highest win rate decks of the week in the Mythic Rank bracket on MTG Arena. So we get the data from UntappedGG, what you see on the screen, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client, aggregates user win rates, gives a whole bunch of cool stats. Link for Untapped is in the video description if you want to get started. Otherwise, we will copy and paste all these deck lists in the video description so you can pull them there. And while you're there, make sure to like this video. It's free, helps out the channel as well. So let's get started with popularity of the day. And then we will look at the deck lists themselves. For popularity, it's kind of like what distribution of decks are you most likely to see when you queue up in the arena ladder. And like, I'll start. There was a deck that was working really well for me when I was playing on my iPad, and I tried it on Friday to like get a video of it, and I lost every game in terrible fashion. So we're going back on the drawing board with that, but that one wasn't working the way I wanted it to. But starting off, we got popularity, mono red, 18%. So this is up quite a bit from last week, actually. Don't know why that chart's not working, but it was about 10%, 10, 12% last week. So we're getting that as a little bit of an increase. We have mono black mid-range at about 14%. So this is kind of the natural predator of these mono red decks. Notably as well, like the mono white control decks, we're not seeing them in huge volumes like the tokens deck because they tend to be a little bit slower, but those usually have a fairly reasonable matchup against mono. Esper self bounce at 13%. We have Boros Auras at 12, Rakdos at 5, which is basically like a mono red fling style deck. Selesnya Rabbits at 3.6. And then Skeletons, yes, mono black Skeletons has actually had a good week. We're going to cover that deck. It had a super reasonable win rate this week. And then mono white life gain, not the greatest deck, like I would say. It can steal some games, but a little bit fragile in terms, didn't really show up in the stats. One thing to kind of note, the Esper self bounce, at least in the best of 3 video that we put out yesterday, had a much higher win rate than the Dimir self bounce deck, for what it's worth. So we're not seeing much in terms of the Dimir version in best of 1 in terms of like the stats. It could certainly still win, you know, curving Kaido on turn 3 could win games. But this particular version seems to be doing a little bit better. It was about 5 or 6%, if I recall, between the spread between the two decks. So looking at our stuff, 67,000 games played in Mythic for the last week. Looking at a 100-game cap, we start off with Boros Auras at 60. We can't even round to 69%. But this deck here, pretty stock. We've seen some like Lauren's escape some weeks, some kind of flex spots there. But the core of this deck, you have your mouse package, which we'll cover in a number of decks. Very strong, even say like Explorer, Pioneer. And then you are using a bunch of auras. So Sheltered by Ghost being the most notable. Lifelink, Removal, Ward, Power Boost. You protect your creatures with Shard Mage Rescue. You have Optimistic Scavenger as a way to put on counters. Ethereal Armor boosts up your team really large, or your creature really large. And then those with something like Double Strike, the Trample, so like Manifold Mouse giving Trample, Feather of Flight giving Flying, Demonic Ruckus giving Trample, all very strong plays there. We are getting a Verge in the new set, which will be very, very welcomed for this deck. So you don't have to play Transportal. It does notably produce white first instead of red. So would have liked it the other way because these decks tend to be a little bit more base red, but the lands are great. Always want more lands in the set. Mono black Skeletons, 63%. There's 110 games, so it's not like someone played 5 games. This is a super reasonable amount. I do think the mana base, you could definitely improve it. Soulstone and Sanctuary being notable since it plays with some of your synergies of Skeletons. But the kind of key card here, Corpse of the Lost. 3 mana, 1/0 your Skeletons have haste. So it makes a skeleton, then if you descend on your turn, you can return the Corpse of the Lost to your hand and then basically recast it. The deck itself, there's some interesting cards here. Bitter Triumph could probably be go for the throat just from like a life game perspective. You're not really concerned with like putting cards into the graveyard. Obviously there's this descend, but that's pretty much the only descend value. You're not reanimating. That's where you typically see stuff like the Bitter Triumph. Cut down in here, cheap removal, miners, a skeleton that could come back, some cheap life linkers. So I have a feeling this is like someone with a lower MMR just kind of playing it out, but got some life gain synergies, death trigger kind of things, and then bloodletter on the top end. But some of these effects are pretty strong. You could definitely like tweak it a bit. Full set of cut down, I'd say. Full set of go for the throat. You have Deep Cavern Bat for some disruption. The Aclazotz you probably don't need in this deck. Just keep the curve lower. So even just like trimming these, playing these, and then maybe playing like a better one drop if there may be. Even something like a Duress or something to hit against sweepers or some removal could be reasonable. Or just even just more like nowhere to run, stuff like that. Mono Red Aggro. So interesting this week, this version's playing 24 lands, which is quite high. Usually these decks play 21. So that's a notable thing off the bat. They are playing Shock instead of the... So we'll fix this up a little, because you should be playing the other burn spell, the 2 mana with... it's skipping my mind right now. And then Shock's usually kind of a flex spot, but these decks usually play 21 lands. Witch Stalker Frenzy is fine. You're just a really aggressively slanted deck, but I'm going to tweak that up a bit just because you're going to flood out, especially in best of one with the hand smoother. That is not going to be reasonable. But very aggressive deck, your mouse package, kind of smash into your opponent that way there. This next deck is pretty sweet. So we got to pull it up this way. Untapped does a weird thing with best of one when there's a sideboard. So the full list will have all these lands shown. But this is Omniscience combo. So there's a blue-white version that's going around. This version is Jeskai. But the core of this deck here, it's a combo deck. So what you're trying to do, put cards into your graveyard. You achieve that through Thrill of Possibility, Brass's Tunnel Grinder, Ill-Time Explosion. And then what you're trying to do is animate the Omniscience. So with animating Omniscience, what you're able to do is cast Invasion of Arcavios. Invasion of Arcavios will then get from your sideboard, you're going to get the Beseech the Mirror. Beseech the Mirror, you're not going to bargain it. You're just going to catch Beseech the Mirror. And then what you do is go get another invasion. That will go into your sideboard, get this town ain't big enough. And then what you do is with this town ain't big enough, you return to your hand the 2 battles. Then you go into your graveyard, you get Beseech the Mirror, and you get this town ain't big enough. With the you do that, then you bounce it to hand, you play them again, you get the Heroic Reinforcements, and then basically cast Heroic Reinforcements for free. You get this town ain't big enough, you bounce them both to hand, and you just keep getting back this town ain't big enough and Heroic Reinforcements. Keep casting it, attacking for lethal. You can also do, instead of Heroic Reinforcements, you can do Breach the Multiverse and mill out your opponent that way there. You have one with the Multiverse for some more. So this one's kind of Omniscience at home. It protects you. So it can kind of do it, but it's limiting. You can only do 1 per turn, but it could allow you to potentially cast this into this as well. So you can Abuelas it. You can return it from your graveyard. So you have multiple ways between like the campus renovations, repair, recharge, Abuelas. So quite a few ways to kind of cheat that into play. This version's this way's a little softer to removal because your opponent can kill your Omniscience. And you're not playing like the counter spells like the other version would. It's a little bit kind of convoluted, but once you see it in action, it's pretty sweet deck. Simic Tempo. So we have the horror deck. So this deck here, looking to put a bunch of spells into your graveyard. You have this Storm Chasers, this town ain't big enough combo. It gets quite a bit of value. Storm Chasers gives you creatures. This town can bounce back Storm Chasers. Storm Chasers can level 2 to get back this town. That can bounce it back to get it back. And you're just kind of creating loops. Up the Beanstalk as a way to draw a bunch of cards with your bigger stuff. Cash Grab in here mills you. Seed of Hope mills you. A bunch of cards, ways to put cards into your graveyard. And then a bunch of bounce effects to kind of keep you alive. But then you just play like 5/5s and smash into your opponent. Selesnya Rabbits. So this one's at 57%. So a creature tribal, you have a bunch of ways to kind of go wide in this deck. So Paw Patch Recruit can make you multiple bodies, hop to it, The Evangelist makes you multiple bodies. You have the Warren War Leader that can make you more bodies when it attacks. And then you have ways to kind of take advantage. So every creature coming in that's a rabbit makes this Valley Might Caller bigger. The Burrow Guard scales with the number of creatures you have. The Scries, when your rabbits enter to kind of filter your draws and be an Anthem. Phineas could put counters on your things, potentially draw you cards. Knight Errant draws you cards, kind of mixed into there. We then go to Esper Self-Bounce, so Pixie as the deck is referred to. So this deck here is, again, looking to use the combination of Storm Chaser's talent. This town ain't big enough as the kind of core engine, but it takes it further. Hopeless Nightmare comes into play, forces your opponent to discard, they take 2 damage. Tiny Bones, similar idea with the discard. You have Scavenger that can put counters on all your things. You can pick up these cheap enchantments or your cheap creatures with Fear of Isolation or Nurturing Pixie to get some value. Nowhere to Run is a repeatable card, like removal option you can bring back to hand, gets around the ward or protection effects like from Shardmage Rescue. Sheltered by Ghost as removal. Entity Dracker draws you cards. Kaido can kind of tap down stuff and slowly run away with the game there. But this deck it does a lot of incidental damage just through Nightmares coming into play and like picking at your opponent's life total. Gruul Aggro. So this deck is like the mono red version that does much better in best of 3 because you have access to just powerful green cards. Paw Patch Recruit, like sometimes I'll play Paw Patch Recruit in the main. You also get access to like Paw Patch Formation. Questing Druid as a card advantage engine. Innkeeper's Talent is a repeatable way to trigger Valiant. Burst Lightning was a card that was skipping my mind from the mono red deck. But very similar kind of concept to the mono red version, but you have some protection effects, card advantage, and the Innkeeper's Talent. In best of 1, I would probably suggest finding space to play the full set of Nemesis. Card is very strong in best of 1, given that the density of decks do tend to be more mono red in focused. I would probably just cut like the Snakeskin and the Torch Tower to play these 2 copies of the Nemesis in the deck. One Restless Ridgeline. One card you might see, some of the decks are slowly adapting 1 to 2 copies of Soulstone Sanctuary, given that it can mimic the mice in the deck, so you get the effect of like Manifold Mouse with it. Mono Black Discard. So I don't think Painful Quandary is that good of a card, but the kind of core of the deck can be reasonable. This one here, it's finally playing utility lands, which is great. Sometimes you'll just see them play like 25 swamps, but when you're doing top decks, you're going to run to a point where both players are top decking, so having mana sinks is good. A lot of ways to eat out your opponent's hand. Ruthless Negotiation, Builder's Talent can be a win condition on its own. Thought Stalker Warlock, Liliana. The Quandary kind of forces your opponent into a do or die situation later on. Virtues as removal. Shelly is life gain, just a wall against some decks. And then just tons and tons of removal. Cut downs, Annoyance, Go for the Throats, Shieldred's Edict, all mixed in. We have a couple community decks that got folks into Mythic in the last little bit. So this is from Ty, 19 and 5, but this is the Mono White Control, Mono White Tokens deck. So a lot of cheap removal here. Really interesting to see that they're 2 and 3 versus Mono Red, where this deck usually eats at them. So opting to play 3 Rest in Peace as a meta call for kind of any of the graveyard focused combos. But this deck here, you have Lay Down Arms, Carrot Cakes, Get Lost, Soul Partition, just a bunch of cheap removal, card draw through the wazoo between Caretaker's Talent and Enduring Innocence with all the tokens coming in. The kind of split here in terms of sweepers, just acknowledging that the format does tend to be a little bit more aggressive. 2 Overlord of the Mistmores. I think I would probably do like 2 Rest in Peace, 3 Overlords in that case. The reason being, like, while this is very effective in certain matchups, you're not playing something like, say, a Fable of the Mirror Breaker, which would allow you to kind of loot when those cards aren't good. So you're kind of playing, if you have it in your hand against Mono Red, well, you're basically mulliganing a card in that respect, but give you some ideas in that shell. We then go to Shani with Selesnya Cage, 20 and 9. I'm curious just to see Mono Red 4 and 1, Mono Black 6-0, so really promising against those strategies. So this deck's quite popular in best of 3 as well. You'll see like a Cyborg, but for best of 1. What this deck's trying to do is kind of mirror that multiple creatures per body. So Paw Patch Recruit for 3 mana can give you 2 bodies. Sandstorm Salvager, same idea, 2 bodies. Sanguine, 2 bodies. Kobe, 2 bodies. Against the discard decks, well, you cheat and play Wilt Leaf Leech for free. You have Mistmores in here on the top end, while you can obviously, impending it, the core of the deck is built around this card Collector's Cage. So Hideaway, you get to look at the top 5 cards, put one of them underneath, and then for a mana, you could tap, put a counter on a target creature you control, and then if you have 3 creatures with different powers, you basically get to cast that card for free at instant speed. So you could do it on your opponent's turn for like Surprise Mistmore, Surprise Sheltered, kind of mixed into there as well. But it's like a green-white tokens deck that's looking to go wide, and then also just like surprise out big things. And then lastly, probably more of the fun of thing, but like I've definitely lost to this a couple times. It's the black-white Raise Pass deck. So kind of an aristocratic style deck. Ignore the sideboard, but this one, is from Gutter Hunks. They're 113 and 75 with it, so quite a few games played. So what you're trying to do with this deck here is just a bunch of ways to incidentally gain life. You can put cards into your graveyard. So you have Hinterland Sanctifier, Snarling Gorehound. You'll sometimes see like Amalia in this deck, which I'd probably recommend with all the ways to kind of gain life. Just probably play Amalia over the Ajani's Pridemate. You could play a full set of Essence Chandler. So this one's kind of going more on the combo route with the sacrifice effect as well. So a lot of things to gain you life when they come in, like Elias Akor, Hinterland Sanctifier. Then you have things like Starstake Cleric. When you gain life, your opponent loses life. Enduring Innocence draws you cards, but this can't be hit by Raise the Past. But with this version here, your creatures come into play, and then when they die, things like Elias Akor's Blood Artist effect, same with Vengeful Witch, can drain your opponent out as well. That's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been liking, and we'll catch you next time. Have a great one.